All right, hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. So my talk today is how Lean UX fixes common Agile challenges. So it's actually really, really awful coming after a designer because they do such nice slides. But I did have a solution to that. I have 3 slides done by a real designer, and the rest are mine, and you can try to pick out which ones were done by a designer. The first one you can probably figure is one of them. So Lean Agile Scrum Primer, I'm pretty sure most people know this, but it's really about working in incremental and iterative delivery process, working from working software, embraces learning and change, ship the software, get it out there. It's focused on teams and people over process. And our Rangle teams include product owners, the Scrum Master, developers, designer, and QA. The product owner usually comes from the client. And so we have a lot of different product owners, but our teams are fairly consistent. This is in stark contrast to waterfall and traditional ways of working on things where people look for certainty, do the design, do the development, do the testing, and ship it. And Lean UX, as you heard about the validation, that's like the first talk talked a lot about that. But it sounds simple, but it's not. It's about people. People are complicated. It's about business context. People high up in companies, they want to see certain outcomes. They're asking for proof, and it's hard to get that, and it's hard for them to get the context. And so one of the great things about Rangle is we've done lots and lots of projects, and we've learned a lot because we're trying to do this over and over again in all kinds of different environments. So we are a Lean Agile design and delivery. We focus on Lean Agile design and delivery of modern HTML5 applications built with modern JavaScript. So we only do Lean UX, we only do Lean Agile, we only do JavaScript. So we're not like shifting things all the time. We're not doing a Java project, a Python project. We're doing the same thing, and we're building large applications in the front end with a lot of design. They're really cool apps. They're big, they're complex, but we have a lot of cool sort of simplifications because we're a very focused business. So we do this over and over and over again. We're JavaScript only. We sort of promote ourselves as the JavaScript experts, but since we're building applications, we really are Lean UX design experts as well. And the Lean UX design practice is a big part of what we do. And one of the reasons is, as we've worked with a lot of clients, with Agile delivery, like you have to know what to deliver. You have to have those conversations, and that's really broken. So we've done 60 plus modern Agile JavaScript projects with a broad mix of UX and design practices. We often would have a large customer to get the funding, like for an enterprise, to get the funding, they did the design up front. They had a UX firm. They have these mock-ups, and they want us to build it, and they give it to us. And it's like, okay, deliver this, agilely. But tell us exactly how much it's going to cost and when it's going to be done and how many people you need. And we're actually pretty good at giving a rough sense of that, but what they don't realize is that they're probably quite wrong with what they've given us, but they're not going to do user testing because they think they've got it right. They had to get sign-off, and they're actually scared to do user testing. There's a lot of dysfunction there, going back to the other talk, because user testing can throw it off. Maybe it's a bigger project. Maybe it's just, you got to deal with the business people. We did a beautiful pitch on Agile to a large company, and the IT guy was starting to look really scared, and it's like, we're doing mock-ups, and they're going to sign off on it, and there's absolutely no way we're going to let them have any more say after that, because it's just too difficult to deal with them. So there's a lot of interesting things that put pressure on these projects. And there's a broad mix of product owners and stakeholder environments. So you can think of it in 2 ways, right? There's what you're doing. There's the delivery of the software in a Lean Agile process, but there's the what you're delivering and how that what gets approved, and that's the context of the process. So we've been doing a lot of work, and we've got a pretty good baseline process. So we do clean code, we do testing, we do communication versus specifications. We try to, but there's often specifications there. We do continuous delivery, we do sustainable development, so we don't try to fix the process by burning out our developers. We try to, because it doesn't work. And our designers. Well, no, that's okay. The designers are sort of young. They can handle it. No, and the designers, everybody. And we have a really strong commitment to the process, but sometimes the process doesn't feel like it's working because, the specifications, the lack of communication, we're not just communicating among ourselves. We're talking to a product owner, and we're talking to users, And even when we have that working beautifully, that product owner is talking to his stakeholders. And it's broken telephone. And they have expectations that we don't really see. And the product owner is just, they love what we're doing. They're really excited. They agree with everything. We build something. We make changes. We do trade-offs. We get user feedback. It goes in front of a stakeholder, and the stakeholder's going, this is not what I asked for. It's like, where's this thing that I saw like 9 weeks ago? There's a lot of interesting challenges, even with the perfect design and delivery team. It's still hard. So what's hard about Agile? Building a team is really hard. It's a different way of working. It takes a lot of emotional intelligence, collaboration. It requires trusting that you're going to get where you want to go through collaboration. You have to integrate with that surrounding business context. You have to maintain your team. So you could have a great Agile team, but then you got pressures for a deadline. Let's start incurring technical debt. Let's cut corners. Let's stop discussing the specifications. Let's stop talking to the users. We just got to get this done by this deadline. Why? Because that's what was promised. So yeah, you guys, Agile's good, and we'll let you do Agile, but show us that it works by building this by this date. It's a contradiction. So you can build an Agile team. You have a strong Agile team. You got strong communication. The team has quick discovery of user and business context. They have a high emotional sort of intelligence. They can discuss issues. They can self-organize and fix issues. They have a strong bias towards delivering value, not building logon systems and authentication systems and object relational mappers and machine learning sort of backends. They're trying to deliver value. They're really focused on the user. And they have a real tacit understanding of Lean Agile. They trust it. They know when it's going wrong, and they self-correct. They push back. And they're a highly effective team. Now, there's a great study that came out of Google. I don't know how many people have seen this, but the number one aspect of high-performing teams is psychological safety. So people feel they can work together, trust each other, raise issues, and work together as a team. That's great. That's a real great fundamental principle of an Agile team. But when you step outside of that team to the context, we've had wonderful Agile teams with great people who love each other, work well together, and they're getting all this pressure, and they can feel it, and they're really professional, and they don't like it. And so that context becomes an issue. So how do you break an Agile team? Assume you've got a well-functioning Agile team, which lots of companies never get to because they're always breaking it. So we're in a unique position. We've done 60-plus projects. We've worked with all these different clients. We've worked with great startups. We've learned these principles. We've brought them together. They've spread through our culture. We put together a team. It's a really, really good Agile team. But now they start feeling these pressures. But since they're within our culture and they're used to working this way, they can stand up to it. But if they weren't, and these are the requests we sometimes get, or how things go, provide specs and no communication. So don't do big upfront design, do Agile. What do? We get a UX team to do a stack of UX screens, and we give that to a delivery team, and we say, build it. That's a spec, and it's a spec without any business logic. It's without any details. There's not enough there. Now, in an Agile environment, the communication's happening at the same time, and so you're getting that, and you're playing back and forth. Have no process to discuss the spec. So if spec was done 3 months ago by another team, your team's building it, there's just a ridiculous screen, and there's nobody who can answer to it. There was a professional UX team that designed this screen. Some user signed off on it, some stakeholder signed off on it. There's absolutely no forum for conversation. There's no autonomy, there's no self-direction because you're just doing what the spec was done. You're doing it to a schedule, there's no conversation, and the deadline is more important than anything else. Like, just get it done, get it built. There's unrealistic schedules. That's an intense amount of pressure. And those promises were being made from the product owner to the stakeholders, and in a lot of cases, those promises are implicit from us to our clients. Now, we're very clear we're an Agile company. We do time and materials. There's risk in software. But again, people sort of have an expectation that you're going to be close. And we don't know everything about a system. And sometimes the APIs are broken. There's like massive issues in the original design. These are things that come up in that learning, which should be a good thing, but that causes the schedule to slip, and that causes sort of schedule pressure. So one thing we do well is that we don't break from that. We keep our Agile practices. We keep our focus on doing things in an Agile way, testing, clean code, and sustainable delivery. That causes some friction. And with a lot of Agile teams, they're overworked, or they're overstressed. Because even with a perfect working environment from a product owner feeding features into a team, the features are good, the team gets them, they build them, the iterations are well scoped, you can still feel that leaks through. Your product owner is starting to lose hair, he's starting to twitch, he's getting fidgety, like there's a lot of pressure. So how do you solve that? So much of what was about the team, how much of that was about the team or the process at a high level? I think I already sort of covered that, but if I bring that back up, there's not a lot here that's really about Agile specifically. The communication, yes, but if the communication's there, like a lot of this stuff is about that outside pressure coming into the team. You are Agile. You're an Agile team. You work agilely. A lot of companies feel that, but there's a lot of fundamental things that are broken. So what's the solution? It's to look at the entire system. So, yes. I did add this text, but I got scared, so I got some consulting on the typography and fixed it. And it does look a lot better. So this is really where your team is living. You have this team with a Scrum Master, designer, a couple of developers, quality assurance, with a product owner, and they're like let's just assume they're the perfect Agile team. They've been doing it forever and ever and ever. They've worked together. They love each other. They feel safe with each other. And now they're going into a new context. And there's the company context. What's the stakeholders' experience? What are they trying to get? What's the trust level? What's the industry context? Who are they trying to compete with, catch up with? And the users. What's the user experience? There's these factors in the context. And so the stakeholder experience generally rules in this situation. These are the guys with the budget. And this is your typical stakeholder when he's asked to fund an Agile project. It's like, you want me to do what? Like, you're not going to tell me what I'm going to get, how much it's going to cost. You're not going to promise it. Like, I don't get it. And so they want scope, budget, schedule, and they approve it. Like, they set the scope, the budget, the schedule, and they approve it. That goes into the team. The team grabs that. They get a spec, because that spec was needed to get that done and signed off on. They churn through the spec. When they raise issues, there's no effective communication back. The users are not really connected to the team. There's no way to talk to the users. The stakeholders don't want you talking to the users. And so the spec flows in and gets spit out the other end to the end users. And there's no real thinking. There's no engagement on it. And people are trying to do that, but you just don't have the channels to do that. Like, there is no channel. Like, you're in this bubble. There's no learning. So this is a common conversation with an executive stakeholder on an Agile project. We need 3 more programmers. Use Agile programming methods. That solves everything. And Agile programming just doesn't mean doing more work with fewer people. And it's like, I don't understand that. Find me some words that do mean that and come back. This is a common quote. We're doing Agile well. We completed our last project on time. I've interviewed Scrum Masters who basically said that I've delivered all of my projects on budget and on time. Like, think about that. How do you deliver a project on budget and on time without a waterfall process, right? What you do is you deliver crap, you burn out your team, you treat people poorly, or maybe they do it to themselves because people are professional, they really want to do well. It doesn't really work. This implies a fixed scope, that there were specs and mock-ups, a fixed schedule. Did any conversations happen? Was this an Agile project, or was it really just a waterfall project with a lot of chaos and really not a lot of discipline? So this is how do we fix it? And this was getting back to the title, because you're probably wondering, like, that title was something about Lean UX. And I heard about it at the beginning a bit, but how do we fix this in one slide? So you want to solve for the boundaries, because what normally happens is you have a team in a context and you adapt the team to a context. So we have a team, they're working on a project, and they're not really discussing things, they're building to the spec, there's no tests, there's no focus on quality, there's no clean code. And so the team adjusts to that, and now you have this faux Agile project, which people call fragile. And even though this was like a fantastic Agile team, they've got none of the tools to do that effectively. And there's this pressure that's going against their instincts now because they are used to working in an Agile manner, and it makes them happy, and now they're not happy. And so, what you can do and how you solve the boundaries is having the conversations and having the processes at the boundaries. And one way to develop that is because it's not like you can explain it to someone and teach it to someone. That's one of the big challenges with Agile. People look for a process solution, but it's not a process. I mean, there's a process, but it's an understanding. It's a way people work together. There's this complex system in play. And so one of the best ways to look at an Agile team is if you have a team and there's friction, that friction is a good thing, because where there's friction, that's where the process problem is, and that's where you fix things, at those boundaries. Japanese lean manufacturing is a great example of this. They relentlessly solve problems through continuous improvement and doing like 5 whys and looking into the root cause of things and developing, like they had issues. One of the big things with Japanese manufacturing is they'd have a part of their manufacturing plant that required 2 days to change over some tooling. That was a severe constraint on the process. So what they did is they worked on it. They fixed that. They could do a changeover in 20 minutes, and now they had a much more flexible manufacturing sort of line. There's a book on manufacturing called Theory of Constraints, and then there's also one that's sort of a rewrite of that for software and DevOps called the Phoenix Project. It's like, what are you trying to do? Are you going to adapt the team or solve the problem? So if you hold firm, you have this team, and you solve at the boundaries, then you can start to really accelerate and have an effective Agile process. And Lean UX is the most effective way of doing that, because it's generating the conversations and the artifacts in a way that feeds the process in an Agile continuous delivery type of manner. So traditional UX and the tyranny of the spec. If you have a real high-fidelity mock-up, this is my slide, as you probably could guess. I tried. There's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of different value, and it's not really tied to a particular outcome. It's not a user interaction. It's not a user goal. It's a whole screen, and it's pretty big. And when you try to break this down without a lot of context, you can only pull out big pieces. And it destroys your ability to deliver small, high-value features, because it's not conversational. It's not really what's being done. It's just a big blob of stuff. Screens are big. You can't identify value. You can't discuss why. You can't prioritize value. And you end up with a unit of conversation. The screen is not equal to the unit of, the unit of conversation, what's the software going to do for someone, is not equal to the unit of design, which is not equal to the unit of development, which is not equal to the unit of validation. Like if you think of it, you have a conversation, a design, a development, and a validation. If those are mismatched, you're going to have a lot of friction in the process. Let me show you another way of looking at that. So you're pulling out features, and you're told that you're supposed to deliver small features in Scrum. It's supposed to be 1 to 2 days per feature. You're supposed to have a quick, or another way of looking at it is a quick cycle time. You're supposed to not have a lot of work in progress. And you end up, though, with these features that are really hard to break down because they're coming out of the mock-up. And what normally happens, each feature has some nugget of high value, but you have a lot of other stuff that goes with it, because how do you pull that one thing out of that screen? Like you have a form with a whole bunch of fields. It looks simple, but then some of those fields require a lookup in another database. They require some back-end modeling in the system. And you can't really deliver those because someone's looking at the screen, they're waiting for the screen, they're QAing the screen, they're showing the screen to the stakeholder. Everything's working at this level, and now you have the story that is like, someone said it was an 8-point story, and the team thinks, well, they're supposed to be 2-point stories. So what do? They try to break it up, they can't, and so they just change it to a 2-point story. So you have like something that's 2 weeks of work, that's going to take 2 points, but that's okay, because in Scrum it's about velocity, points aren't days. It's dysfunctional. There's just not the right unit of work there, and specs drive a lot of that. So specs are screens, larger features that mix high and low priority. And the result is 30 to 60% of waste. You're just carrying all this stuff that's not valuable. And you can't even talk about it because it's all lumped together and there's no traceability. Compared to if you can break things down and you do a natural prioritization when you're designing and building stuff, you got all your high value stuff up top. You get through like 4 features that has the vast majority of the value, and you've really done it in a third of the time. Now, once you've done those first 4, why would you actually go to the low-value stuff? There's more high-value stuff that's come out, and you continue to focus on that. And all this stuff that was important to somebody that's in those specs, you just never get to it because there's not a lot of stuff that needs to be done. There's more stuff that's more important, and you get through like a delivery period of, say, 8 weeks, and you've got some kick-ass value that's been delivered, and you haven't delivered anything that was really near what you were thinking of in the first place. I mean, a funny fact, users can't tell you what's high value. You need to watch them experience the software. That's the other aspect of it. You can't get enough context to get the right design up front. You have to see them use it. So those smaller features are driving that learning that drives the later like high-value features. So traditional UX design can increase scope because there's no way to learn what's high value versus low value. And there's also really a disconnect from what you're designing and what you're building. And so you can end up with something that's vastly more expensive to build. We've had one client, we did the estimate based upon low fidelity mockups, and then it went to their design firm and it came back, and the actual sort of design that came back probably doubled the cost or potential cost because there was a lot of stuff that didn't really deliver value, but it was nice design. Lean UX decreases it by splitting big UX into a design theory context. So you have like a style guide, you have like the theory, you have sort of patterns, you have context, you have conversations with the stakeholders about this. They know that it's going to look like this, it's going to have this kind of look and feel. Now when you're actually showing software to stakeholders and people, they're not going to get hung up on the fact that it's not pretty. You have small features around conversations, and you have rapid delivery of software. You're achieving a lot of the same design goals, but you've decomposed it into something that you can deliver faster. And now you can get user feedback on specific things that's more effective and feed that into your project. So now the unit of conversation equals the unit of design, equals the unit of development, equals the unit of validation. And you can replace the certainty and cost estimates that a stakeholder is looking for with understanding and involvement, feedback on value delivered, and user engagement. You can get to that point where there's this flow through the organization that stakeholders can get the context. And that's what I was talking about earlier. We never think about stakeholder experience. We talk about user experience all the time, and we're solving for the user experience. And we know how to do that, but we've left the stakeholders because we don't like them because they're like executives and stuff like that. And we don't solve for their problems. We just think they're all idiots, and that's not true. They have limited knowledge from where they are, and they don't have the tools to manage their organization and software projects. So thinking about stakeholder experience and solving that to work through that boundary is a very effective way to improve an organization's adoption of Agile. And again, Lean UX is a great practice for doing that. And you can get trust in the process. But here's the problem. If you start with the stakeholder and you tell them they're going to get all this, and then you put an Agile team, that team isn't Agile because they haven't worked together, they haven't built up the process, and there's so much organizational context leaning on them, they're going to become fragile, almost for sure. And now the stakeholder is going to lose interest, and they're going to get people telling them all the time, but you just got to do this, you just got to do this. If you got users involved, if you didn't set budgets, if you didn't set schedules, that would fix everything. It's much more complex than that. So if you can solve for some of this, if you can build teams, keep those teams agile, solve for the boundaries, you can work it both ways. And just thinking about the stakeholder experience in that process. So for an effective stakeholder experience, get the team built, fix the spec, fix the context, and provide feedback that creates a good stakeholder experience. And design is critical for that. Alternative, try to explain the process. So this isn't a joke, actually. This is a slide I created 3 years ago to try to explain Agile to a CEO so that he would buy into a lean Agile delivery process. And I was really, really proud of it at the time because I understood it. No one else did. Talking to it makes more sense. So you get increasing clarity, embrace change because you're going to have change early on. So a lot of people don't like Agile because they feel like they're throwing away code, but you get more value because you're learning, and so you got to be comfortable throwing away. So, and then you got this process, UX design development, but this is just like overload. It doesn't stick. It doesn't really solve the people problems. So here's another shot at it. I really like this one too. It didn't really help with anybody. So now back to the team and the context. So, solve for the boundaries. And so if we look at each boundary and what the problems are, we have the company context, what's the stakeholder's experience, no specs, conversations, now we're creating the design theory, we're creating sort of playbooks, and now we're creating design, but we're tying the design to the conversation and very close to the actual ingest, build, delivery, validation from the users. Now, those conversations happening there are also happening with the users, and the conversation with the users is used to validate the strategy. And we're delivering into the industry and getting some market intelligence. And so we're getting market intelligence, we're getting the company strategy, we're getting user feedback, and now we have these conversations going on, and this is creating more trust, this is creating understanding. And now when we get into the delivery process, if we can reflect the results of the delivery, now we have the overall trust in the process, and we can keep our team happy and effective. Now, one thing about this, this team is ideally the same thing. One of the interesting things about, across all kinds of different environments, one of the interesting things about HTML5 and modern web development is what you do in a startup is actually very similar to what you would normally do in an enterprise now, because all that enterprise complexity is behind a REST API, and all that legacy and all that stuff, it's all sitting there and it's packaged away, and you've got a nice REST API, you can go get that data, work with it, and you're working in a greenfield opportunity with all these really cool new JavaScript and HTML tools and processes, and you're really building the same kind of thing with the same kind of team. And so why does doing this on an enterprise project suck so badly compared to doing it in a startup? And it's because of the context and really getting to the users and solving the boundaries. Because theoretically, at a simple level, that PO and that team are all the same thing. And from a team perspective, you're trying to get this person's sort of trust. And if this person is really strong and effective, they're going to block and tackle, and they're going to get what you need. And you can actually feel like this is a really enlightened enterprise, and you've got that love, and everything feels good. Sometimes that'll go great for a few weeks, but then they're going to start getting the pressure, some changes. They're going to want to make a change to the spec now. They want to cut some stuff. They want to prioritize. You've learned something from some users. You have to add a massive new feature, which means you've got to drop something. Nobody wants to have that conversation. Why didn't you get it right at first? So now things start to sort of unwind a little bit because that whole sort of context hasn't been solved for. And so then the team actually just feels like, our product owner. It's we just need better product owners. Now if we coach the product owner. And so we're working the product owner. And the thing is, in a large company, everybody comes in and does the same thing, right? So with a large company, you have one vendor come in and do something for you, and they're telling you they know how to solve your problems. The next vendor comes in and says the same thing. Someone else says the same thing. Usually you just end up saying what sounds very similar. It's like Agile and this better process, and you got to use Git flow, and you got to use smaller features, and you got to use lean UX, and you got to talk to the users, and it just becomes sort of blah blah blah, and it doesn't really resonate because everyone hears it all the time, and it becomes noise. So sort of different approaches, getting really deeper and thinking deeply about that stakeholder context. Somebody talked about 1 week versus 2 week sprints earlier. I have an interesting sort of perspective on that because at Rangle, when we were growing as a company, we were like an Angular company and a JavaScript company. We didn't have a lot of real process at first. We were just good developers and delivering technical value. Then we built out our design team, and we built out our Scrum team, and we're starting to put together full teams. But we're hiring new people all the time. We've got new clients coming in all the time, and we hadn't developed all those things that make a team really effective. A lot of the tacit knowledge, how they work together, setting up the relationship with the client, getting used to having sort of the Scrum ceremonies, but not having them feel like a burden, having a good relationship with the product owner, getting the right story sizes, breaking down the stories, getting through that sort of tyranny of the spec, which we didn't really recognize early on. And so one of the most frequent complaints, like a year and a half ago at Rangle, was that 1 week sprints are not sustainable. They're not good. They're not enough. We're not getting enough done. And we want to do 2 week sprints. And we didn't change. So we stayed on 1 week sprints because we did a lot of small projects. And sometimes when you set a constraint and you keep working at things and you practice and you do it over and over again, you actually learn to solve for that. So as an example, GM, I'm going to get the numbers a little wrong, but GM in 1980 took like 104 hours to build a car. And there's no way they could have figured out how to shorten that, because this is just the way it works. Japanese were doing it in 40 hours. Now, if you think of the labor of like a person putting a car together, that expense is like staggering. And so how did they do that? They did it through continuous improvement, looking at the value stream, training, empowering, letting the line workers pull the cord and stop the line. And they got those efficiencies that made things work better. Scrum and Agile is very similar. So I haven't heard in the last 9 months a single complaint about 1 week sprints. Now, it's also we're a bigger company, and I probably don't hear that many complaints because I'm a little isolated and I'm not actually actively involved in projects. But I've talked to a lot of people about this, and it really is people are comfortable with 1 week sprints. But now we're pushing into another area. So now we're doing user testing. And 1 week sprints is hard, but that's where the value stream comes into play. So like with the Japanese auto manufacturing, they streamlined their supply chain. They created strong partnerships. They set context. They learned it. They did it more and more. The people had the skills, and they got to the point where they could just do it in a smooth manner. So let's do user testing. Let's do it in 1 week sprints. Let's try to do that and see where we can go. And then after a while, like everything's lined up. So one of the things we've done when we've done a little more testing effectively is there's just so much accidental noise in a process. If you set up with the customer to have the users available, set the schedule, give customers the sheet of what you need, what the questions are, how long you need, when you need it, and you get them to set that up for you, you get on the project, and you have a Scrum Master who has the time and the bandwidth to actually facilitate removing roadblocks. You do the design, you do the development, you have a Scrum Master sort of, making everything work together. And now as a UX designer, you just show up and everybody's there and the process is there. You're not learning the process. You can start to really sort of do things faster. And you can start, now maybe 1 week is too hard. And definitely there are contexts where you need 2 week sprints, 3 week sprints. But there's that interesting aspect of maintaining sort of your goals, continuously improving, and then your team can effectively execute, but you can't do that without the entire context. If you can't get the company to agree to the users, if you can't get them to agree to the process, if you have to adjust the process, you might run into more challenges in executing that. So I like to take different words from cool software development things and mash them up with other things because it's just fun. And so the concept of immutable teams, like if you can define a team and make it immutable. So you're going to do clean code. You're going to do testing. You're going to do lean UX. You're going to do QA. You're going to do everything. You're going to do sustainable development. And you're going to do that, and you're going to maintain that, and you're going to do Scrum, and you're going to have the right team. If there's someone missing from your team, you're going to bring them in. Like if you need a full-time designer, you got a full-time designer. If the API is a problem, you have an API person on your team. You have a Scrum Master facilitating all this. You have a good relationship with the product owner. You get the right story sizes. You can manage all that within the team and set that boundary, and then have mutable boundaries. And so as Rangle grows, our biggest challenge now is we've got these awesome teams, but we fail them in the sense that we're not working the boundaries hard enough, and that's where we're really growing in this year, is being able to work and develop the relationships and sort of drive transformation in larger companies so our awesome teams can deliver without actually dealing with that sort of challenge of an environment that's at odds with our Agile process but thinks it's aligned with it. And so I don't know if I have a good summary slide, but that's where Lean UX destroys that tyranny of the spec, establishes the communication, and sort of sets up that sort of process where you can continuously improve and get that sort of end-to-end process that has everyone involved and happy. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Nick. That was very good. What I want to know is how do you convince? Like you cited one example where you have where you had a company that took your estimate, then went out, got the design, the really detailed design done by an outside firm. There's a lot of companies out there that really want to do it that way, and if you want to do it the Agile way, I guess you sort of need to have the design going hand in hand along the way. So how do you How do you sell this to those people?
So there's a couple of things. One is, we're a new company, so as we get bigger and we can represent more about our experience, like usually I don't really talk much about Rangle. I talk about theory and stuff like that. I don't feel that good about talking about the company, but in a sense that's where we can get some of the credibility to have those conversations. So if I'm talking to a company or if I'm talking to a group and I can tell them that we've done this 100 times, we've built all these teams, we do it over and over again, we've done it in all these environments, we felt the pain and we're really learning how to fix that pain, then we can sort of start to establish some of those boundaries early on in the project. And so if you can set expectations and you can get buy-in. I've talked with a VP of a very large bank, and it's just like, I know you guys are good, but if you come in here and start telling us about your process, it's going to basically drive everyone nuts because every single vendor, we've got Deloitte, we've got IBM, everybody has a solution. So it's got to come from a different perspective. And so if we can take what we've done and how we've worked and that learnings and turn that into something that's different, then we can set the boundaries and have the conversations and set that context. So part of it is really, I think the immutable team concept, like we're going to give you a team and it's going to cause friction. And that friction is where we're going to focus. But rather than our team bending, we're going to ask you to bend. Is that going to work for you? Because this is going to help you really transform your company and drive a cultural shift. Now, a lot of companies won't care. They'll come and they're talking to us and they'll sort of say yes, but they're really just looking to get more development talent in-house. But most companies do want to do better, but they just don't trust the process forward. So different way of doing it, different way of talking about it. As a company, at some point, this is very effective learning. I don't know how far we can go in helping have these conversations and getting clients bought in. And so maybe we just don't work with certain clients. But I think that generally, sometimes if you have that conversation up front and they sort of understand there's going to be friction and you're not just telling them it's all going to be beautiful because we're agile and they know that it's coming, then you can have those conversations. Martin Fowler from ThoughtWorks had a great sort of comment, was that, people don't like working with ThoughtWorks, but they sort of appreciate it. Sort of like going to the gym and working with your personal trainer. You don't really enjoy that, but you're getting a benefit, right? And so if there's a process, a proven process, and a conversation around that, then that trauma, that friction, those challenges will be worked on collaboratively. But if that's not, expectations not set ahead of time, that's going to be harder to have that conversation.
You answered the next question already. Psychic.
All right.